My name is Alex Brosque. I played for Sydney FC across two stints, 10 years total, from 2006 to 2011, I believe, and then 2014 to 2019.
Why you think Sydney FC have become, over the 20 years of the A-League and our history, the most successful club?
I think it was there from day one. Sydney FC, in the signings that they announced, with Dwight York coming, Pierre-Luc Brosque coming, it was always clear that, on top of Sydney being, probably the biggest city in the country, Sydney FC was always going to be, the city where, and the club where, players internationally wanted to come and play and be a part of. So from day one, it was, I guess, in the foundations that Sydney FC was always going to be a big club. So it is no surprise that, over the years it's been so incredibly successful and won as many trophies as it has.
Tell us about your sort of role, certainly in the early years and the success that they had in sort of 2010. What do you remember specifically about that season?
Yeah, look, heading into the 2010 season, we hadn't won anything, and in terms of Sydney FC being a big club and constantly in search of silverware, it'd been too long for since the last time Sydney had been champions. So I think there was a frustration not only from the fans but within the playing group itself, that we weren't able to to deliver as we should have. So the senior players that we had in the team at the time really took it upon themselves to make sure that season everybody got the best out of it, and guys were driving from day one. We had some incredible experience that guided the young players. We had a good coach, good managers, and everybody was just just in sync into achieving that goal at the end of the season. Sydney and Melbourne were the two biggest clubs. They still are, but certainly in that time, and coming up against them, guys like Kevin Muscat, Archie Thompson, they were battles every single game. The crowds were incredible as well. That final game against Melbourne Victory at home at Allianz Stadium was incredible. We had to obviously win to jump them and win the premiership, and it just had a great feel about it. I think from start to finish, we went up 1-0. Carol Kissel scored an incredible volley from outside the box, and then Johnny Aloisi wrapped it up with that incredible goal from halfway. And it was, I guess, at that moment, where we had, everything that we'd done, we sort of knew, right, this is going to be our season, regardless of what happens from there. There was such a great feeling. I mean, we had to win, the Premier's Plate, and the way we did it, against Melbourne Victory, our big rivals, was incredible.
And then going down there for the grand final, what was the atmosphere like? Were you confident going into that, knowing that you'd already lost to them in the semi-finals, if you like, and you had to come through Wellington, I think it was?
Look, there was certainly a confidence about it. I think, winning the premiership in a must-win game, put us in a good way for the final. As Sydney FC is, Melbourne Victory is a big club, and in finals football, both clubs tend to stand up, and anything can happen on those given days. It's all about little moments that can happen, and I guess one was when Archie Thompson went off injured, and then when we scored. While it wasn't a great goal by any means, it felt as though, okay, this is going to be our day. They equalise off a quick free kick, and again those doubts start to creep in. But I think that confidence was always still there. And then that famous moment when Muskie hits the penalty, makes that and Butzer reacts to the crowd and to the bench. It had that feeling, in certain moments, that it was meant to be for us.
That sustained period of success that we had in the final kind of part of the 2010 years, was there a point in time that you realised that this could be sort of really big and good for us?
Well, everything changed when Graham Arnold came to the club, and everything he'd achieved as a manager already before then, with the Mariners in particular, in developing an incredible culture within a club and within a change room. I was overseas at the time, and he contacted me about coming home, about coming back to the club, And it was an easy decision, you know, given all of that, given what I knew about Arnie and everything he said that he had, you know, he was planning on doing. In pre-season, we already, as players, I roomed with David Carney, and we felt as though there was no one that could beat us, you know, and that's very rare to have. You don't have that feeling going into a season, but it felt as though we just had every position on the field covered, you know, and we had the way we gelled together in pre-season, the way, you know, again, on the field but off the field, everybody was close. The young boys, there was no separation or old players here, foreign players there, young players there. It felt as though we were all together as one. And I think, especially in the A-League, where you have a salary cap and there's very, you know, you look to those little details to be a key and difference between teams winning and losing. It just felt as though we had all the right ingredients. Arnie had built exactly what he wanted, and there was no one that was going to stop us. And that's how the season started. You know, we I think had an incredible start to the season. So we knew from the very beginning. I mean, it was in pre-season where, and I'd never had that before, you know, that feeling of no one's going to come close to us. Our leadership group was incredible, you know, with Wilco there, Carney, Zulo, all the foreigners as well, the way they bought into what we were doing. It was just an incredibly close group of players that you know, you could tell were built for success, and all these guys were winners. I think if you have one player who can disrupt the group, it can cause issues, and you don't get the best out of the team. But we just had everybody, you know, whether they were starting, coming off the bench, sitting in the stands, everybody understanding what needed to be done.
And I'm going to ask you about the grand final and memories of that. But how was it? Yeah, how were you feeling going into the grand final?
Well, going into the grand final, obviously there's an air of confidence among the whole group, because we'd had an incredibly successful season. We won the league by, I can't remember how many points, but you know, we'd broken so many records throughout that year in terms of goals scored, points, you know, the points difference between first and second, and we'd beaten Melbourne Victory all 3 times we played them in the season, and there was, as confident as we were, there was always that little bit of, I wouldn't say doubt, but those little bit of nerves where, you know, again, it's a one-off game, you know, and as good as we've been all season, we only lost the one game in the year. Without a doubt, we deserve to be champions, but it is a one-off game and anything can happen, you know, and I think the game plan that we had, we didn't create a lot of chances like we'd had all season, you know, in terms of being free-flowing in attack and creating chances, it wasn't happening. Melbourne Victory were frustrating us, and then they got a goal through through Berisha out of nowhere. It was a bit of a counter-attack. He's gone on a dribble and put one past Danny Vukovic, who'd been, you know, unstoppable all year, and I think at that moment we knew we had to lift. So, you know, we did, and we kept going forward and pushing and trying in search for that second or that equaliser. And Ryan Grant popped up, you know, Geordie Boyce off the corner. I think it was a corner. Swivels, plays it back in. David Carney does the same, and on his right foot forces a save, and Ryan Grant, as he does, you know, multiple times in grand finals, he popped up and got us the equaliser. And I think at that moment, and if you look at the celebrations, it just felt as though, you know, because leading into that moment, as the minutes are ticking by and we're down 1-0, you know, it could very easily have sort of just fizzled out the game and not gone our way. But when we get the equaliser, it felt like, right, this is our game. And then going into extra time, I remember Troisi hits the post, and again, for little moments, little omens, I guess it was that one. That could very easily have dropped in and we would have lost the game. But, you know, it hits the post, comes out, and we go to penalties. And I think there was a confidence going into the penalty shootout, you know, with Vuka in goals, with the quality of players that we had in terms of taking penalties, that it was going to be our night.
And tell us about the penalties, your feelings during it, and obviously having to take one yourself.
Look, I think as one of the, you know, senior players in the group, it was important to show a bit of confidence and you know, composure at that moment and confidence in that moment. So when Arnie asked the group who wanted to take a penalty, I put my hand up, and he told me basically that I was going first. He wanted me to go first, and then he set the line from there. But Yeah, look, I was confident, I think, in making that decision to take a penalty. You know, that walk going up to the goal is a lonely one, you know, or it can be. I think I felt, you know, a few nerves, but also a calmness in being at home, in knowing I had the fans behind me. You know, that there was only going to be one outcome. It wasn't a great penalty by any means, but you know, the goalkeeper went the wrong way and got us off on the right way. But yeah, look, I think everyone that took one really on that day showed courage, showed character, and Vuka in goals, obviously, you know, saving a couple for us was immense as well. So the way it finished with Ninkovic, who'd just been named Player of the Season as well that year and had an incredible year for us, done so much for the club as well. For him to cap it off and win it for us, and the scenes afterwards were incredible.
The Johnny Warren medalist, the best player in the league this season. If this goes in, it's Sydney's crown. Ninkovic scores! Dreams have come true in sky blue! Sydney FC are the champions of Australia for the first time in 7 years.
In 2019, it was a different. There had been a few changes, but I think that core group was still there. You know, so I think there were different feelings going into it. I think for myself personally as well, knowing that it was going to be my last game. You know, I was a lot more calm going into that grand final. You know, for me, I wanted to enjoy the game. You know, I didn't feel as much pressure going into that one as I did in 16, 17. I felt like the last, you know, the 3 years that we'd had as a team, and what we'd built as a club, and what we'd gotten the team and the club back to, you know, I was proud of the group and proud of the fact that we were there again at another grand final. Those foundations had been set for the team to continue to have success for many more years. You know, and while Perth did win the premiership that year, it did feel as though, you know, we were close behind and were worthy champions anyway, because we you know, had another incredible season, and we're built, you know, we'd been built for those moments. We shut them down, we limited them to any real chances. We had a goal disallowed, which in looking back should have been allowed, and again we went to penalties as we always seem to do. But yeah, there was a different feeling in that season. There was more of a calmness. And ultimately it ended up well for us again. Look, I mean, going into the penalty shootout, we knew how good Redders had been all season with penalties, and obviously our famous Wiggles routine was out in force as well throughout all of those penalties, and it worked. You know, I think whether psychologically it does something to opposing players or regardless, he's just that good at penalties. I think we had a confidence in him to be able to deliver, and the boys taking penalties, of course, a lot of quality there. So I think once he saved that first one to Keogh, and then Santalab stepping up for his penalty, and you know, I think it was a much more, I guess, routine penalty shootout than the one before. But yeah, certainly after Redder saved that second one, I felt like anyone for them stepping up was gonna have those doubts, and that's how it played out. Redders was huge for us, and all the boys that took one scored and did well. And then Reza, you know, getting the final one to win us the game, just another big moment.
Gushanachan scores! And against the Premiers, against all odds, a long way from home, it is Sydney FC who are the champions of Australia for a record-equalling fourth time.
Well, for me, you know, stepping out onto Allianz Stadium has always been an incredible feeling. You know, the crowd has, you know, consistently, you know, shown up in big numbers. The Cove, you know, I guess goes without saying as to the passion that they give to the players, and we feed off their energy, and you know, for a number of years. And you do see over different generations and new groups of kids coming through, but I think the Cove has always been special to the players, and the fans have always showed up in big numbers, you know, through difficult times in those early years to the success that we had. They've always been there, they've always supported the team, its players, and have played a huge part in why Sydney FC is the biggest club.
Do you think the next 20 years can bring this similar success?
Look, I think it can. I think, you know, with the academy having been set up and the amount of good young players we've got coming through, you know, the Sydney FC Academy is the best in the country by far. And I think in finding that balance in recent seasons between bringing young kids through to add to the, you know, the experience that we have, the international players that come through as well, and add that little bit of quality. I think Sydney FC will always get the best of the best. You know, and that success, you know, in building Sky Park as well, and off field, the club being, you know, as big as it is. I think that success in the next 20 years will continue to be there. The trophies will continue to pour in, and as long as, you know, that culture which was, you know, set up in those earlier years carries on, and the you know, the young players learn off the guys who are here, the, you know, Wilkinsons, Ryan Grant's, guys who were there when it all really kicked off for us, that era of success that we had, then the club is in good hands, and the next 20 years should bring a lot of success.